Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to everybody online. My name's Professor Will Swan. I'm the Director of Energy House Labs, and welcome to the professorial inaugural lecture for Professor Richard Fitton. I've worked with Richard for over a decade now, and when he joined us, we had a nascent buildings and energy research unit, commercial unit. And he joined us at the start really with Energy House 1, or the Salford Energy House as it was at the time. And over the last decade, it's grown to be one of the biggest, most high profile units that we have. We've gone from, being the new kid on the block to dealing with some of the bigger universities, dealing with large companies, industry, some people who are with us today. And that rapid growth, because I think 10 years to build a huge research unit that we have, from 1 lab to 5 labs, is a testament to Richard's commitment. That is driven by hard work, knowledge, application. And I think it's not just about the research, it's about Richard's generosity to young researchers, about sharing his knowledge, about making a difference. So the charity that we established, the Friends of Energy House Labs, all of these things kind of show what Richard is all about, and then it's about making a difference. So I won't go on too much longer because Richard's got 61 slides, but it's a real pleasure, for me. Richard's been, working hand in hand for such a long time, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Richard Fitton.
So, it's working, Mike? Excellent. Can we get rid of this slide now? I've been wanting to get rid of this slide for the past 5 minutes. There we go. So, thanks, Will. So, for those who I don't know, which is probably a few in the room rather than a majority, my name's Richard, and I'm the Technical Director of Energy House Labs, and I have been for the past, over a decade, as Will's just pointed out. So, I was asked to hopefully useful to different people. So I'm going to try and suggest some ways that we can get to net zero in our building stock in the UK. So hopefully you'll find it interesting. We've got some time for questions at the end. So if you think of anything along the way, then there'll be plenty of opportunity to answer those questions when we get around to it. So this is how we're going to approach it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. I'm going to tell you about some of my time at the university, what we do, where we work, the existing homes and retrofit side of things that we do, the future home side of things which we do, a quick roundup, and then any questions at the end. So this is who I am. I studied at Technical College in Oldham when I was a mere young boy. Then I graduated my bachelor's in building surveying over at Sheffield in 2001. I spent 10 years in the building surveying industry, working in various different places, from the Ministry of Defence, the local authority, and finally working with training and development of courses. I joined the University of Salford as a technical consultant way back in 2011 when I had hair and it was black and everything was great. So that's a little bit about who I am. This button thing is not excellent, is it? Have we got a different button? Is it me? I'm going to use this. So, old school. So this is my very brief history at the University of Salford. I started in 2011. I was made the manager, the technical manager of the Energy House in 2013. I made the lectureship in 2015. Then I did my PhD part-time, and I got that in 2016. Then I was offered a readership in 2019, and then finally I was offered my professor role 2022. Seems like a long time ago now. So this is how I first started at the University of Salford. I went on a tour with Where's he gone? Steve Waterworth is somewhere. He's there. You look exactly the same, Steve. I was at the Trafford as the energy manager over at Trafford Council, and I went on a tour to look around the energy house. Then I was showing my boss the advert for it when I got back. Noticed there was a job vacancy. Went in. Steve interviewed me, and the rest is history, as I say. I started working when we first opened the energy house. There was much press and much interest, and Steve Waterworth was running around with umbrellas, and it was raining on him, and everyone was excited. But there was some problems with the chamber, and it wasn't working to optimal, shall we say. So between ourselves and Nigel, who was there, and Steve, we kind of got it all running and get it to where it is now, which is a world-class facility. But we had to do some work on it. So some people inside the university weren't happy with what I was doing and what Energy House was doing. And I used to get nice notes stuck on my door by very, very, very senior academics every morning for about 6 or 7 months. So I used to throw them in the bin and have some stand-up arguments with academics about what we were doing and why it was the right thing to do. And after a year, it went away. And when the cooling works were all complete, I started my role. Around this time, myself and Will, there was only me, Will, and a guy called Mo when we first started. We set up the Applied Buildings Engineering Research Group, and then Will became my boss. And that's generally what he does. He just stands and looks up at things and gets things done. So why do we do all this? So it's probably quite obvious to many in the room why we do it. Climate change is happening. The Earth's surface temperature is gaining heat very quickly, and it's up about 1.1% since the pre-industrial era. And we've had the 7 warmest years between 2015 and 2021. And this happens most across our land rather than across the sea. And it's also more than twice as fast in the Arctic. So we've got severe problems all across the globe. And the UK isn't isolated from this. About 10 of our warmest years in the UK have happened since 2003. 2022 was our hottest year on record, with the first average year-round temperature of 10 degrees or over 10 degrees. So, and we also get more extreme events like flooding, wildfires, and rising sea levels across the planet. So it's quite obvious why we're looking at the things that affect climate change. So buildings are responsible for a lot of the issues we have around climate change, and about 40% of the global energy-related carbon emissions are from buildings. About a third of them, 28%, from energy needed to heat, cool, and power, and 11% for the actual materials that go into the buildings. So what we need to look at is how we reduce these emissions to slow the climate change down, and more likely as well for the work we do is realise the fact that climate change is happening, do something about it, but also understand how the buildings are going to perform when this climate change happens, as we can obviously see that it will do. And then add on top of that the cost of living crisis, and it makes these issues more and more relevant, as we've seen certainly in the last maybe 3 or 4 years. So the UK, as it stands now, has the worst performing housing stock in the UK. About 80% of the homes that are going to exist in 2050, we've already built. So it's too late, really, to think that the new build sector is going to fix all our problems. The UK has been insulating lofts and paying for this since the 1970s, and yet about a third, 31% of our homes, 8 million of them, still don't have easy to fix loft insulation. So people just don't take up these measures sometimes, even if you give it them for free. Again, about 30% of cavities, can be filled, but they aren't. So 3.8 million homes that are still left that are classed as easy to treat. There's no reason why these buildings can't be treated. The worst of our properties are the solid wall properties, which we represent in Energy House. So that lets us look that they're a very serious problem with solid wall, because these are the homes that have had basically nothing done to them. About 9% of them have been treated. So we've about 7.7 million left to go out in the UK, which is a massive number. And speaking of massive numbers, if we are to get where we need to get by 2050 for our net zero targets, then we need to do some retrofit to 27 million homes. So 900,000 homes per year, 2,466 homes per day. And the slower we take, the longer it's going to take, and the worse the problems are going to be. So how do we do it? So we have kind of 4 strands to what we do in our research group. We tend to look very much at the decarbonisation side of things. So that's reducing the energy that buildings need to run them, to heat, cool, power and light them. And then we look at embodied energy. So how much energy goes into a building at the start of it, during its operational time, and then at the end of it as well. How does that carbon cycle work? Adaptation. So like I said earlier, we need to look at increasing temperatures across the globe, more extreme weather, and the biodiversity side of things. How do we kind of engage with all those things and make sure our buildings can work for the future? Energy transition. So we are going to move the way that we heat and power our homes. So we're going to go electrification, we think, on the heating side of things. Same with transport. District heating will become more common. And hydrogen, well, I think the jury's still out on our hydrogen, but we'll wait and see. Digitization is the final piece in the puzzle, which basically means that we have a lot more data flowing from houses now. So we have our smart meters, we have smart thermostats and heating controls and things like this. How can that have an effect on what we do? But more to the point, how can we make life easier for people to save energy? And then layered over the top of all that is the data services that we can use to do that stuff with. So how does Energy House Labs kind of fit in with that? There's a lot of people who are really focused on energy savings measures, and it's got a lot of stakeholders, this industry. So you've got the landlords, they need to know what's happening for their investments and their tenants. You've got the people who actually invest in the energy saving measures. You've got the policymakers who we meet fairly regularly now. You've got the product manufacturers who are developing these things. You've got the homeowners and you've got the house builders as well. So we like to think that Energy House Lab sits in the middle of those things alongside how we validate and how we measure the performance of energy savings products. So this is what we do. So we have Energy House, which is our first project. We have a thermal measurement laboratory, which is all around how we measure the thermal performance of materials and how that can be improved. We have the Smart Homes and Smart Meters Lab. So that looks at the data side of things and how we can acquire data and make best use of it from smart meters and other infrastructure in homes. And last, we have Energy House 2, which is all around new build and looking at more of a global marketplace. And I think last but not least, Will touched on it, we're really proud of the charity, Friends of Energy House, or Friends of Energy House Labs, I think it's called now, not Friends of Energy House 2. So what we do there is we work with a lot of people who are really interested in things we do, and they also have corporate sustainability and things that they look at in terms of how they can engage with charities and how they can engage with helping people for the betterment of their lives. So this is all focused around the Northwest. So we look at diversification of workforce, educational outreach, and supporting students and local community initiatives. So that's all based within the Northwest. And up to now, we've raised about 300,000 for that charity. And it's only been going 2 years. So we've done fairly well off that. And it's sponsored PhD students, undergrads, and other postgrad work as well. So we kind of happy with that project. It's good. So this is kind of where we started Energy House. We needed to do something, and this was before my time, but the difficulty still remains the same. We have the Climate Change Act, which brought about all the things that we talk about in terms of net zero and things like this. We have, like I said earlier, this problem with existing homes. We have the problem of how we assess if something is a good solution or a bad solution in retrofit. We needed somewhere we could do repeatable experiments. We needed high quality data, and we needed the ability to change the house. So if you go to the house, the Energy House, at any time, you'll see that it's been hacked to pieces. It's been, at the moment, it's been insulated externally. It's had the floors out. It's had everything you can do to that building has been done. We needed somewhere as a playground for energy efficiency measures, really. So we look at everything across Energy House. We look at boilers, we look at thermal paints, we look at insulation. The air quality icon there is not perfect, I have to say. But we look at all the different things that we can do, from the high cost measures, from the full retrofits, right the way through to curtains and ventilation and all the other kind of side issues that we talk about, and EVs as well. And I think when me or Dave or Will do kind of tours around the facility and people ask what we've tested, we can pretty much answer yes now to every measure that people mention. So which is pretty impressive. So here we see the Energy House. So it's a Victorian terrace in a large environmental chamber. And what we're doing there, we've externally insulated the building, but we do far more in-depth studies than this. So this is the guys at the back here from Energy House did this work. So this is Dave Farmer, Grant and Bill. So these were basically looking at very deep retrofit. It's called the DEEP project. Don't worry about the numbers and the graphs and stuff like that. The fact is, you will see that there are some very high costs, right the way up to 32k for kind of full retrofits, but there's some jumps in this. And what we see all the time is that these big jumps happen when we start to externally insulate the building. And then there's some things we can do to tidy up along the top. But if you look at these costs, they're high. So we start off with ground floor insulation, which is our kind of big jumping point, 5,000, 6,000, then we're right the way up to 32k. So I'm not going to labour the point of the graph, but the fact is that to do retrofit right takes some significant investment, and to do the research right, make sure that we get these investment figures right as well. We can tell people really safely, hopefully, what will happen to their homes. So again, the same project here from Dave's team. We're looking at where does a gas central heating system kind of start to be slightly better or slightly worse than an air source heat pump. And basically the point where an air source heat pump becomes a good thing to do for that building, where the costs are just about the same, is when we do the whole house approach, where we kind of look at the full picture here. So it's studies like that policymakers can take and say, right, this is actually when things work. And that's what they want to see. And it comes back to that validation piece of de-risking retrofit. Deep retrofit is hard, it's expensive, it's disruptive, and it's underfunded. And I think that's what Deep told us, is the fact to do it right costs a lot, but it does save a lot at the end. And it's all about how we invest in properties. So when we see solutions that are really difficult, then we also start to think about things that aren't difficult. And we start to think of some of the ways we can save energy that are low cost. So last winter, we were funded by Nesta, who are a big charity in the UK. And that was driven by a literature review and some data collection that we did down at Energy House 1 with Dave's team. And we looked across the low cost energy savings measures. And then Cambridge Architectural Research kind of took our findings and our literature reviews and built a profile of the UK. And these are some of the facts and figures. It's a bit small to read on the screen, but the point of this slide is that we generate a lot of data and there's a lot of good savings. If you went past any of the bus stops throughout the UK, these were the measures and the messages that were being put out by government, okay, straight from our data through our literature research as well. So that's good. So again, low cost measures, we start to think about things that like window films that could cost £8 if you do your whole house, and the rooms that you kind of tend to heat the most, we can be talking about 3% saving off your energy bill. These are things that have never been researched before because they were seen as too cheap, too cost effective, no one was really interested. But when the prices are going so high, then people quickly become interested in them. Curtains, which Professor Swan daily teases me about. So I spent a lot of time researching curtains in my past, and the point is, everyone that comes to the Energy House says, how much energy does curtains save? That's what they want to actually find out, nothing else. So people are really interested in the low cost stuff. And if you look at curtains in a typical scenario, it's £10 a year. They're not massive savings, but we can benefit from it. 48% of the homes that the ONS looked at said we can benefit from putting those kind of things in. More importantly, is this again, this was done by Dave's team over at Energy House 1. We looked at combi boiler flow temperature, and this was actually featured on billboards, on bus stops, national campaigns on the radio and TV as the key government energy saving measure. And this is about if you turn down your boiler to a slightly less a set point on the heating flow temperature, it basically makes the boiler condense more, it becomes more efficient, and then it starts to work in the way it should. When a boiler is installed, they're usually set about 75 degrees, the heating engineer walks away. If we can set them from 75 down to 60, then we're talking about 8% saving off your gas bill, £97 a year. Okay, and that figure will just go up every time the price cap goes up as well. So, you know, things like this, that research had never been done before. So Dave's team provided the fundamental research to the government messaging for the entire winter season. And people thought it had been done before, and then you look into the data and it's just a made up number. So that's what we're good at. We're good at providing the evidence and finding out why actually things can save. So these aren't small numbers. You know, my measly curtain research could save 142 million a year. The window films, if every house that we thought could do it, did it, that's £1 billion a year. Boiler turn down, another £1 billion a year of energy that could be in people's pockets rather than heating the rest of the outside world. So, you know, when we're talking about the cost of living crisis, they're not necessarily, people aren't interested in doing full massive retrofits and building new houses. They're interested in this stuff, and this is what makes the difference. So when we do see these quick fix solutions, we see things that don't work as well. And I take particular pride in my job of finding things that don't work. It's what I enjoy most. We find that people offer savings solutions that are so good that they can't be true. So if something's too good to be true, it's not true. Thermal paints are an example of this. And they're often advertised with huge savings figures. And some of the figures that we saw advertised didn't appear to be very realistic. So we took some of the samples, and bear in mind, some of these samples claim to use vacuums and nanospheres and all the other technological buzzwords that we like to hear. That, you know, I'm no expert in vacuums, but I know that you can't hold a vacuum in something that's shattered to pieces like this. And when you look at something very closely under a microscope, you kind of start to figure out how these things are being portrayed as working, but when you look at them closely, they can't work. Now, this is a big graph with, it's not very clear text, but I only want you to look at one thing. And the one thing is that bar against that bar. These are all thermal paints, with the exception of this one, which is just simple lining paper on a wall. And this is good old-fashioned polystyrene backed wallpaper, which we used in the 70s to fight condensation and mold growth. So don't even worry about the numbers, just worry about the size of those, okay? The next one, so that tells you that these are the savings being offered by thermal paint. That's the saving being offered by something as simple as a thin slither of polystyrene. Again, don't worry about the numbers, worry about this end column. This is how long it takes for those to pay back. The worst one was over 1,000 years, and the best one, which was still good old-fashioned friend EPS and liner paper, was 50 years. Okay, bearing in mind these take over £1,000 to install. So, you know, the best saving that we found was 3%. Okay, so when we get the newspaper and magazine adverts that say 25%, that's what led us to kind of take this thing quite seriously, because there's a huge difference in cost savings and energy savings between something that works and something that works as it's advertised. So EPS was far the best. Now, what I would caveat this with is thermal paints do have their place. So reflective paints and things like this, if you use them in heat-dominated climates where you've got very high rates of solar radiation on the outside of the building, they will reflect and they will help save some air conditioning loads. And also, they will help things like mold growth. Some of these paints will stop mold and condensation on your walls, but they will not save the 25% energy, which they're advertised as doing. So that's why we kind of had to do, we've got to do the things that save, and we've got to do the things that don't save as well. So that's our kind of retrofit side of things. We do stacks, we continue to do stacks, and Dave's facility is full up as long as he could ever use that facility. There'll always be someone waiting to use Energy House 1. And it still remains the only one in the world. So we're over the moon with the Energy House 1. Z House was our kind of first foray into new build. We're not really done a great deal on new build, but we knew we had to do something. So Barrett's came to us and they said, we're going to build the house of the future. Would you like to have it on your campus? And we said yes. And they built their house of the future on campus. It was fairly straightforward. We found a piece of land, they built it, and we had people live in it. We measured the performance of it, and we gave them some feedback on it. Was it perfect? No, we found some issues. What did it lead to them doing something better? Hopefully. And the next thing that they did with us was they built then a house in Energy House 2. So Z House was a kind of good jumping in point for us for the new build sector. So speaking of which, that's kind of when we figured out, well, it was around that time where we probably already figured it out, that we needed to kind of do something a bit different than Energy House 1. Energy House 1 probably always be our best friend. It was certainly where I started, but it had this kind of fixed asset, which is really difficult to change. So when we built it, it was difficult. To take it down and build something else would be difficult, but also we wanted to keep it. It's not something that we particularly want to change. The profile was very much aimed towards the UK and Northern Europe, so -12 and plus 30 degrees C. Had waiting times of more than a year, so we kind of, wanted to kind of push that thing on. Other universities that asked me and Will to design facilities for them. We didn't particularly want to do that. And we wanted to retain the leadership in this area. So we wanted to kind of maintain our standing of hopefully being the best at what we do. So this is what we started off with. So this was my handwriting and sketch for those who recognise it. This was kind of super Energy House 2. It had 3 houses in it. It was more or less a full street. We had trees and all sorts, I think, when we got into the details. And that's where we started. 2015 was kind of where that kind of pencil hit the page. 2016, we got the concept. So this was, again, all singing, all dancing. It had, different plant rooms and different sections, and it had more than enough space to do anything we want. Then we moved on, and this was our kind of next feasibility stage. So bear in mind, 2 years have gone by here. Nothing moves quickly in a university. And it was looking pretty much like we wanted it to look. Then we value engineered the oval circuit from the outside. And this is what we ended up with, which we're happy with. So it went through many different iterations before we got to this kind of 2018 final stage. And one of the main obvious points there was, what could we afford? Okay, so this is basically what we could afford at the end of it. And this led myself and Will to go to the government, to go to Europe, to go to the university, to gain £16 million worth of funding for this building, which obviously Will led that, and it was quite a difficult task for him, but we did it, and then we needed to build it, which is where it was handed back to me. So we took down one of the most beautiful pieces of architecture on the campus, unfortunately, and we replaced that with a car park, so that allowed us to build Energy House 2. So what you're looking at here is the foundations for Energy House 2, and don't worry, it will get more exciting. But the fact here is that just underneath the building, there's a couple of £1 million worth of building work just to support the environmental chambers. So it was quite an impressive kind of civil engineering project before it even got out of the ground, and certainly totally unique for its time. The next huge portion of work on this building was the HVAC, the bit that makes it hot and the bit that makes it cold. and there was, you know, a good between a third and a half of the money was spent just on the HVAC, which for a building project is unheard of. It was all in the machinery. So all of the expensive stuff is hidden away. That's up in a plant room, and the foundations no one will ever see again. But I assure you it's all there. So then we came to finish it, and then we came to test it. We didn't have any houses, so we had to put porta cabins in there, fill them full of heaters, and then had to fill it full of snow and everything else, and get the rigs all running without there being any houses in there. So this is kind of where we went from. So I'm going to talk over this video. So Energy House, what was obviously a key asset. It does everything it's meant to do. It does the wind, it does the rain, it does the snow, it does everything that we need that building to possibly do. But we could see ways that we could improve what we did, and we could see ways to make it a lot more flexible. So this is the building for those who haven't seen it. This is just as it was being finished. So it is a big kind of white box. That's as simple as it is. There's no windows because that would be solar gain, and it would interrupt the cladding and the continuity, the thermal side of things. It would just be quite difficult. So it's a bit of an odd place to work. These are the chambers, and as we go through now, we'll start to see kind of what it looks like in terms of scale. So where we went from having this empty building, then we had an open competition to the house builders to come in and suggest buildings that they wanted to build. And because it was a European project, that had to be done all fair and square. So basically what we have is we have a house built by Barratt's, and we have a house with Saint-Gobain, and we have a house built by Bellway next door to it. So I'm just going to skim through. So these are a couple of our rain rigs that we used to rain on the building. These are our empty chambers here. So they're no longer empty. I wish they were. This is the HVAC upstairs and downstairs, which kind of keeps it all working and all running. Again, that's difficult equipment to keep running all the time, but it does a very good job, and it's as efficient as it could possibly be as well. There's no point building a building for energy research that isn't kind of energy efficient. Well, I'm sure our energy manager will disagree with that. So there we go. So just to prove that they are real houses, which we often have to do, because everyone thinks that they're kind of dolls houses or make-believe houses. These are real houses built with real foundations in soil that's protected from the outside world. So this is a house being built by Bellway on the right and Saint-Gobain Barratt on the left. And you'll see they had to share the same scaffolders, the same timber erectors, the same health and safety principal coordinator. This was a mammoth task, and they shared that. If this was out in the real world, there would be a huge barbed wire fence right down the middle. They do not share, and they don't share their findings in the real world. They don't share anything. They certainly wouldn't share a chamber. But what they agreed to do, which was really impressive, was to do exactly that. They agreed to share the chambers, share the contractors, share the ground workers and all the other. They also agreed to share all their research publicly. So we've just put out a report, we'll talk about in a second, which says some of the issues with the buildings, and we found some problems. We found the work's good in some areas, less than good in the other areas, but they've been very open with their research, and they've shared it with each other as well, which is really, really unusual for house builders. But it goes to tell you that when we're looking at the future of housing, then the risk is too big for them not to work together and not to get it right. So they also agreed to do things like not put the same heating systems in and not put the same ventilation systems in. So they've got a good kind of overlap of the findings that they get at the end of it. So we were really impressed that they kind of did that. This is how it looks now. So we did some work. Well, we started some work with Volkswagen on the EV side of things. We've got the Bellway and the Barratt house there in the background. This is what it looks like with snow, which is what everyone wants to see, but it's really, really difficult to do, and it takes a long time. But in essence, we kind of the project is a bit bigger than just those two houses. That takes up one chamber out of our two chambers. What we've got next door is very much at the moment very much kind of R&D centre, if you like, where people can just pitch up, build what they want, and then we'll probably take them down in short periods of time. Whereas I think the housing and the other chamber will probably be with us for maybe 4 or 5, 6 years. So this is a product called Mat Zero on the left. So what Mat Zero is is a good example of the kind of range of things we do. This is a UN issue tent that the refugees get. Okay, so the average time that someone would spend in that tent is 12 years. And a family between 4 and 5 would live in that. So it's heated with either a kerosene stove or a fire outside that they bring inside at night to keep warm, which obviously is really dangerous. It leads to a lot of fires, a lot of suffocations, and we can all see that it's a desperate situation to be in. So what Mat Zero is a series of solar panels that goes outside the tent. It feeds into a small battery inside, which they can use for Wi-Fi, and they can use to charge their phones, and they can use for lights. But also it's a heated mat, an infrared heated mat that they can lie on and sleep and keep warm, keep healthy, and keep safe as well, more importantly. So that was out of product design at Loughborough University. So that's a really interesting project. They just had their initial order, I think, for several thousand units to do a field trial. So that we're quite glad to be a part of that project. Thermosil is a new type of energy saving measure which works on adjusting the heat flow over the top of a radiator and then creates an air curtain in front of a window. It has to be measured really carefully, and it's really sensitive to kind of how it works. So the only place I think we could have tested that measure was in Energy House 2, and that's now down with the people who run the energy models for the UK to go into their accreditation scheme to see how much savings that will generate. So it's a good example of different things that we can do, not just working with the big house builders, but working with small SMEs, people working in charity projects, and all the rest. This is our newest building. This was a spin out of the Graphene Centre down in Manchester. And what this was is the Vector Homes, who are the guys here, Liam and Nathan, they aim to create the most cost-effective home to build and to run in the UK. So this is all about providing mass housing for the social sector and able to pay sector as well. But the idea is that it's built from this lightweight steel frame that you see there on the left. Everything can be moved by hand. There's no cranes, there's no machinery needed to build it. It's all basically hand movable. And the insulation, as you would expect from the Graphene Centre, is being reinforced with graphene content as well. So that project to us is really different, and we're really looking forward to kind of seeing where those guys go with that project, because it is a starkly different way to build a home when you compare it to the ones that are in the neighbouring chamber by the mass house builders. So yeah, it's quite an exciting project for us, that. So what did we find? Don't worry, we're on the final furlong now. We're getting there. There's only 400 slides left. So the Future Home Standard will change the way that we build buildings sometime in 2025, yet to be agreed by government. The main differences from how we build will be these differences. There'll be much less carbon, 75% less carbon when compared to 2013 regs. There'll be zero carbon ready. What does that mean? It means that they're pretty good in terms of carbon, but as the grid cleans up and we get more renewables on it, in several years they will become zero carbon. So zero carbon ready is the phrase that they use. They've got a very efficient fabric, so they're well insulated and they've got good levels of air tightness. They'll have lower running costs. They will have solar PV probably, batteries probably, and EV chargers will be very commonplace. Air source heat pumps will be what they use, we predict, and there will be no gas. 2025, no gas in new builds. And we're really lucky because they put out with the Future Homes consultation just before Christmas the kind of building that they're looking at, which is their kind of average building. It's called their notional building. And our houses are very, very similar to that notional building. So we see that there's plenty of mileage now in those houses as research projects. They will be the houses of the future. And they don't look particularly different or special, but that's what we'll be building. So they are now, they were great, but now they're super relevant as well. So we tested them, and we tested them in a lot of detail. and we found some things that were good, some things that were bad, but we found ways we could improve them. So we looked at the air tightness, so that's how much air leaks out of the building and how much heat they lose through that kind of mechanism. We looked at how efficient the building elements are at retaining heat, so the windows, the walls, the floors, the ceilings. And they both performed well. Past trials, so with our partners over in Leeds that we've done a lot of work with, they carried out a lot of research on buildings out in the field, on new builds. So what you see here, these blue lines are all of the buildings that Leeds have published data on. So we've got gaps there. So this is the gap between how they performed and how they were designed, so in terms of heat loss. So some buildings are taking 140% more energy to heat than they were designed to, right the way down to our samples here, which are the two ones in orange, which are 8% and 4%. So we're happy with those, and the house builders, I think, were happy as well. So they're very kind of low performance gap houses. So it shows that we can build these houses, and they're not impossible to build. And they can be built at scale as well, because these are mass house builders, don't forget. These aren't grand designs or footballers' homes. These are something that the masses will live in. So the Bellway, the heat loss was 7.7% worse than the design, which isn't a great deal. The air tightness of the home was quite a significantly amount worse than the design. I'll talk to you about why that might be in a second. The loft insulation was disturbed. We see this a lot in new build. We see a lot of trades get involved in the loft. They go up there to fit PV and batteries and lights and other things, ventilation systems, and they get disturbed a lot. So we often find that the loft insulation is performing less than optimally, shall we say. The windows and doors performed as designed, and generally the floors did as well, but we found the floors very difficult to measure, it's safe to say. So overall, it performed well. What we've done with the house builders, we've made them stick with these homes now. So we're not going to let them go back in and make improvements. We're going to make them stick with it, because then our next batch of tests will be looking at heating. So we need to know what these realistic houses cost to heat. So we're not going to allow any kind of going and fixing, which the house builders have agreed to and they're happy with. So we think the main issue is air tightness, but bear in mind, Bellway put 6 different heating systems in that building. You would generally have one heating system. So there's a lot of holes where it wouldn't normally be. We probably put about, I would say, 3/4 of a kilometre of network cable in there, and all the sockets to go alongside it. Again, that makes things a lot more leaky than it should. And, you know, there's a lot of service penetrations coming in and out of that building as well. The loft insulation generally is less than perfect and disturbed by the trades. And there were some issues around the ceiling of the joints where the wall meets the ceiling upstairs. But all in all, kind of a positive start. So these are some of the defects that we see. This is the loft insulation. This is some of the poor ceiling around the ceiling to wall junctions. So the Barrett house, 3.9% worse than the design. Again, very small. Air tightness was actually slightly better than the design, 6.3%. But we did find some problems in the panels. This was built out of timber frame, both houses were, where some of them hadn't been manufactured quite as they would liked, and they were losing more heat than they should. But still, you know, these are small, they're big percentages, but small numbers in terms of heat loss. The loft insulation was again disturbed at an underperformance of about 26%. But again, the windows and doors were generally okay, and the floors were generally as good as we can measure them to be okay. And here's some of the problems. Again, you got this disturbed insulation here. You've got the kind of the heat loss towards the bottom of the wall there, and that's to do with, we think, with air cycling through the back of the panels. So not 100% perfect, but a really good start. And we gave the house builders and the product manufacturers some really good feedback to come and help improve these. So for instance, Saint-Gobain are going to come and build a small version of their house out of the same timber frames and get all that system working exactly as it should. So Again, the main issues on Saint-Gobain were these assembled wall panels, assembled in a factory, but they just didn't kind of get it 100% right. So we dismantled it. We took it to pieces to find out what the problem was. We took the wall apart, we cut holes in it, and eventually we found out what the problem was. So again, the air tightness of the building was better than designed, but they had 2 heating systems in rather than 6. So again, probably less holes. And we thought that the panelized structure that they'd use, because everything was brought in pre-manufactured. So that might have helped. So how do we get to net zero? That's what we came here to find out. I'm not going to tell you really. Charlie will be very disappointed. But I think what we can safely say is that the existing stock is definitely the problem. You know, the work across all of our labs say that to make these significant improvements is really difficult. It's really complex. It's far more complex than most people think it is, and it's really expensive. But without this work, the UK just won't hit these targets because the new build isn't going to save us. It's got to be the retrofit that we need to look at. Simply adding heat pumps doesn't work. The buildings need to be carefully assessed and retrofitted well in a manner that's sympathetic not only to the building, but to the occupant as well of that building. You can't miss out the occupant in these things, which often is the case. There's definitely no simple solution. There's no one size fits all. It isn't just going doing something one time to every type of building. Workmanship, design, and the appropriate measures are all absolutely critical. And retrofit can present many risks. It can be a risk to the building fabric, and it can be a risk to the building occupants if it all goes wrong. But the biggest risk is not doing it, is just to ignore it. And we may, frankly, run out of time. Because if we saw the numbers right at the beginning, where we had to do, I forgot what the number was, 2,000 a day. There's a lot to do, and there's not a lot of time to do it in. The new build is going okay. From the studies that you've just seen, that's compelling. We're getting it right, but we only build 200,000 houses a year at the moment, so it's not enough to make an impact onto this zero carbon target that we've set ourselves. The Future Home Standard is a significant improvement, but some people might say, does it go quite far enough? We can see that the fabric performance, we are getting there with mass house builders. They're good results. They're fantastic results, I would say. The data will be made public. So all of this data is out there, and anyone can access it. The full data sets are out there. So hopefully that will mean that the likes of Bellway, Saint-Gobain and Barratt are paying for this research, obviously, as we can see. But a small SME builder, you know, who maybe builds 5 or 10 homes every year, can't afford to come and build houses and chambers. So hopefully they will benefit from the work that we've done. Heating and hot water is our next research piece, and we think these are going to be the next big challenges. Fabric, we think is pretty much there, but now the big thing is going to be around air source heat pumps, infrared, underfloor against radiators, and all the different kind of questions that we can ask ourselves around that. And then hot water was the final piece. End is air quality. How do these buildings actually work for the occupants? So in essence, we think that the houses of the future will help the zero carbon kind of topic well, but retrofit is the problem. It's underfunded, it's misunderstood, and it's not incentivized. So that's something that we need to change. And that's it. And thanks for listening.
Thanks, Richard. So we've got a chance to take a few questions. We've got a couple of dialed in questions, but any questions from the audience before I take the ones that have been sent in? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's number one on my list. Is to upgrade the heat side of Energy House too. When we first started, when Will and I put those sketches down in 2015, 40 degrees was fine. But here we are. We're talking well over 40 degrees when we mention overheating. That's 40 degrees air temperature. We also put solar radiation on, which can make it a lot more warm than that. But no, we were asked a few weeks ago what improvements, what investment we might want to look at, and that was number one on the list. Make it hotter.
And then you can.
Yeah. So I didn't put my famous fact on the slides, which was it covers. So the climatic conditions that we see there cover 95% of the globally populated landmass. But that's not to say that it covers the excess, areas. But that is number one on our list, I have to say. Yeah.
Okay, another question from the audience. This gentleman here.
You talked about the cost benefit of air source gas boiler. And I was just wondering if does that look at all at potentially increasing gas costs, or if there is a switch to hydrogen? Because that feels like that changes dramatically, doesn't it?
Yeah, we didn't kind of model out all those scenarios. Dave, can you say when the deep report will be out?
It's longer than the Iraq inquiry, I think.
So the deep
it's
report,
currently with
late
government,
February.
Yeah, it's at February now. Yeah, we did some stuff. It's the gas price ratio, the electricity price ratio makes a big difference. That's done a bit of work.
So just for the benefit of the audience at home, we were talking about the difference between gas and electricity prices, and the work that we're doing, which will be for DESNZ, which will be released late February, early March, I was reliably informed. Okay, one more question from the audience. Yeah.
You talked about the cost of the energy house and everything else. Would computer modelling not have given you largely a good level of insight to that without having to actually do the physical?
Can I repeat the question, Rich?
Yeah.
So for the benefit of the audience at home, could we just not have modelled it all?
How dare you? No, we spend a lot of our time modelling. We have models in the group, but we find that a good use for that facility is to inform the models, and we find there's a performance gap. We never kind of know exactly what that's going to be, but what we excel at is providing really good data for models to use. We're not against models, but we like to inform them, and we use them a lot as well. So yeah. So could you do it with just models? Probably not. Because some of these measures just aren't in the models. Yeah.
Okay. One quick question. I think this has come in from Felicity Hannah from Radio 4. What is your number one energy saving tip for householders?
I'd be remiss if I didn't say curtains, but no. In terms of bang for your buck, I think controls are a great one. Loft insulation is a great one. There is no one size fits all, as we just said. But yeah, I think controls are a good way of saving energy. Don't heat the building parts that you're not living in.
Just one more from the audience. Charlie Baker.
Quite sad. You said you finished on the fabric, and in the work that we've been doing with Your Home Better for the last 2 years, it keeps coming up with our customers, and we keep getting kickback from the usual suspects that are doing the installation. I'm not sure that debate is fixed yet. It would be really lovely to have some guidance on when certain materials are better than others when it comes to things like resistance to defects, that some of the cheaper insulants are not so good at, overheating risk, decrement delay, as well as carbon footprint, performance and price. Can we have some more on that, please?
So for the benefit of the audience at home, that was a question in 8 parts. Can we have some more information on fabric retrofit?
Yeah.
So I'll refer you to David Farmer's deep report that we just mentioned earlier. But yeah, we haven't finished. We've done the baseline testing. So we've got to look at the overheating yet. We've got to look at very exposed and, how would you put it, deep conditions. So right down to -20, right up to +40. But yeah, there's more to come, but the baseline things to build the models. You're never happy, Charlie. That's your problem.
I'm always happy.
Well, kind of.
One more from the audience. This gentleman here.
You've chosen timber frames. What's the life expectancy of these houses if you're building all of these,
So
sorry, let me just repeat the question for the audience at home. So the question is timber frames, what's the life expectancy for those?
I didn't finish the question.
Oh, sorry.
So you've chosen timber frames and you've got the life expectancy and you're talking about net zero. If you're repeatedly, knocking down and rebuilding all these houses, as in Canada, timber frames are really problemsome. How do you deal with the repeated, having to rebuild and the emissions that we're saying that we're going to build with? What's the thinking behind the timber frames?
Yeah.
So the question is really about the reuse and circularity around timber frames and if their life expectancy leads to more embodied emissions.
So there's a really important fact here. We have no input whatsoever in the design of those homes. We are not designers. We let the house builders build what they build. The only way we can have impact is by testing buildings that are real, that are going out there in 20,000 and 10,000, things like that. There's very little point in us telling the house builders something that they don't want to build, that their market will do that. However, we've got a PhD working on LCA. We have a full research group working on LCA on a large Innovate UK project with Manchester as well, and Tyndall as well. So it's not like that's being ignored. It's been very well studied, but we're not here to tell the house builders what to build. We build.
It's not related to cost of building now, rather than the longevity. It could be the plastic bag situation in the
Yeah, but we are there to test and evaluate the houses that are brought to us. We will then give them the LCA data, of course, but we're not a design team. They will design, we will test.
Okay, one more from the questions. There are a number of young people here tonight. Is this a good idea to start a career in?
Is it a good area to start a career in? Yeah, I think so. I think it's important to look at the climate and how we're doing it. I think me and Will, one of our biggest challenge that we ever see is recruitment. Getting people to come and work and do the things that we do is really difficult. We're lucky to have the team we've got, but to grow it is really, really difficult.
Okay, time for one more question from the audience. This gentleman here.
Hi. So the research pretty much sort of focused on the heating in the winter side of things. Is there any research happening on the summer/cooling requirements for the?
So the question for the audience at home is, do we do things in the summer? So we do. For summer. Yeah, for summer and overheating.
Yeah. So the house builders are obviously, as you would expect, when they see substantial periods of overheating, as we saw last year and the year before, that they are very, very interested in that. We will test overheating solutions. We will test overheating mitigation in those buildings as well. And they've also got some systems that they want to install. So air to air, they're going to look at air to air cooling, and they're also going to look at putting cooling systems into their ventilation systems. So yeah, they are definitely interested in that. Definitely.
Okay. Just thanks very much. There's some really good questions there, really engaging questions, thoughtful questions. I'd like to thank Richard for delivering what I think was a very interesting inaugural lecture. And I'd like to thank the audience on Teams Live for joining us this evening. We'll say goodbye to them now.